Okay, let's start talking about the digestive system. So, chapter 23, part A. If we understand the digestive system, obviously we'll be able to help patients when they have GERD, heartburn, stuff like that going on. So, here's the little video. Okay, so let's move on. We're gonna do anatomy for the first part here. So, overview of the digestive system. What they're going to do, where they say organs fall into two categories or two groups. They're going to have the GI tract, the canal, the tube through the body, and then the accessory organs, the things that assist, that are not part of the tube itself. So the GI tract is a continuous muscular tube that runs from your mouth to your anus. It digests food. That's saying it breaks it down from big pieces into smaller fragments, and it absorbs those fragments through the lining and into the blood. Now, you already know, because we did lymphatics, that the fats are a little different than this description, because the fats are absorbed into the lymphatic system through the lacteals, which are then delivered to the blood. So, minor difference. The organs in the GI tract proper are the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, large intestine, anus. I'm going to go ahead and add in here that you should know that most of this tube has two layers of muscle, a longitudinal layer and a circular layer. The stomach is an exception because it has three layers. There's a diagonal layer. And the large intestine is an exception because the circular layer is almost gone. Well, all the muscles almost gone, but the circular layer is gone. And the longitudinal layer is reduced to three little bands of muscle called the tennae coli. Anyway, let's move on. So, accessory digestive organs. Accessory organs are the ones that assist or help. So, the teeth and tongue and the mouth, the gallbladder, which is delivering bile made by the liver into the small intestine, the duodenum. Digestive glands that make secretions would include the liver, which we just mentioned, but there are also other things that the liver is making. Salivary glands in the mouth are, of course, making saliva, which has salivary amylase, salivary lipase, things like that. The pancreas. The pancreas is famous for insulin production, and it does that, but it also makes a whole bunch of enzymes that are necessary to complete digestion. It's really important that you know here that when we go through the list of organs in the tube, a lot of people think of the stomach as the main digestive organ. It's not. It's the small intestine. The stomach is a place that we start the digestion of protein. It's a place that serves as kind of a storage vat, a mixing chamber, where you mix food and enzymes together, but it is not the main organ of digestion. You absorb very small, like you absorb water, across the lining, but there's not a lot of absorption happening there. Most of the absorption and a lot of the breakdown is happening in the small intestine. All right, moving on. So here's an overview. It has pictures of everything. As you can see, we go from the mouth through the esophagus, through the stomach, the small intestine, and then the large intestine, which we divide up into the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon. So, all right, moving on. So in this process, the digestive process, we have ingestion, that means taking food in. So eating, in. The in should be your mnemonic to remind you that's taking food in. Propulsion is moving food through the canal. And the two main things there are swallowing, which starts out as a conscious decision, something with muscles under conscious control. But as you get partway through, that's partway down the throat, we switch over to involuntary muscles. It's hard to, we'll just say it's hard to half swallow. If you get to a certain point, smooth muscles take over and you're moving food through the canal. All right, so the circular layer especially is responsible for two types of movement here. We have peristalsis, that is moving food through the canal. That happens when you have rings of muscle go do 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 do, without the sound effects, of course. What they're doing is forcing things in one direction down the tube. And then we have what we call and that, imagine you have one of those long balloons and you squeeze one end and all the air goes to the other end. That's like peristalsis. Segmentation would be like if you took that balloon and you squeeze it in the middle and the air goes to the two ends, and then you squeeze the ends and the air comes smashing back together. Segmentation is when you have contractions that will separate and move things apart, as they're showing right here. This particular bolus piece of food, we're going to squeeze in the middle. We've now separated the two. Okay, great. But the deal is, if you do this enough, separating and then bringing back together, separating and bringing back together, it's really good at mixing things. So mixes food, breaks it down mechanically, but not really as much propulsion as peristalsis. Peristalsis moves the food along. All right. So mechanical breakdown is not chemical breakdown. It's mechanical breakdown is breaking pieces apart physically, like with force. So chewing the food, mixing with saliva, churning it in the stomach. That third layer in the stomach, the diagonal layer, allows the muscle to do this kind of thing. So you're mixing the food and the enzymes and stomach acid together. So that stuff, segmentation, these are local constrictions in the intestine that mix food with digestive juices. Digestion is different from mechanical breakdown. Digestion, now I'll remind you, we talked about this before in AP1, but reactions are either catabolic, and the C in catabolic should remind you they cut. Think of a pair of scissors. Catabolic reactions cut a molecule apart, and usually that means that they will release energy. Okay. So if you just took a bite of a sandwich, that's mechanical breakdown as you break it in small pieces with your teeth. But when the enzymes start breaking the molecules apart, that's digestion. And it's a catabolic reaction. The other reactions are anabolic. That's when you add things together. When you are, say, taking amino acids and hooking them together to make proteins, that's anabolic. But the digestion is catabolic. You are cutting molecules apart. So you have enzymes that cut them apart, cut apart food molecules into building blocks you can use for other stuff. Absorption is getting those nutrients out of the GI tract, out of the tube, and putting them into the blood or the lymph for fat, which we're then going to send off to the liver to make sure we didn't absorb something really bad. And then what's left in the GI tract after we've done the absorption, well, that's waste that we're going to get rid of. So defecation, passing of poop, passing of fecal matter. All right. And here you can see what happens at what stage. Obviously, ingestion, taking food in, that happens at the mouth. Mechanical breakdown, that also happens in the mouth. It also happens in the stomach, and a little bit it happens in the small intestine. Digestion is going to be happening in the stomach some, but a lot in the small intestine. Absorption is going to be happening in the small intestine, and most of the absorption is in the small intestine. The large intestine is mostly, well, it's absorption, but it's absorption of water and absorption of B vitamins. So I know this is kind of gross, but let me explain it this way. You know what the function of the large intestine is, because you've seen when it's not used. That's what we call diarrhea. Whenever the mixture of food and digestive enzymes and stuff, we call that chyme as it comes. Anyway, when that chyme is being passed along, the absorption of nutrients is happening in the small intestine. In the large intestine, you take what's left, which is runny, liquidy, and you absorb the water out to compact it down to make feces. You also absorb B vitamins at that point. So anyway, the large intestine is absorption of water, like I said, mostly. And that's about it. Let's move on. So organization of the digestive system. You know how around the heart we had the pericardial membrane, and that was a sac made out of serous membrane, two sides, visceral and parietal. Yeah. Well, and then we had around the lungs, we had a sac that we call the pleura, serous membrane, serous fluid in the middle, two layers of visceral that's close to the organ and parietal that's far away. Yeah. We're doing it again. The one that surrounds the GI tract, we call the peritoneum. Okay. So serous membranes, they're in the abdomen. You have a visceral peritoneum that is stuck to the external surface of the GI tract, the tube, and a parietal that is to the periphery, that is stuck to the body wall. Okay, great. Now this peritoneal cavity it's a serous membrane. So the cavity in the middle of it has fluid, and that fluid lubricates the organs, makes it easy for them to move around a little, move past each other. This is good. So you're swallowing a big piece of food. You are going to see the intestine in that area gets bigger as the food passes. Well, it's easy for them to move past each other that way. because you've lubricated it. Everything is lubricated by the serous membrane of the peritoneal cavity. Sorry, the serous fluid of the peritoneal cavity. All right, moving on. The mesentery is a double layer of peritoneum. The layers are stuck back to back. This is from the body wall to the organ. This is special. The blood vessels will be in the mesentery. Nerves could be in the mesentery. And more importantly, it helps hold organs in place and stores fat. Like you and me, it's hard for us to, it's not impossible, but it's hard for us to have bowel torsion, volvulus, because our intestines are anchored by the mesentery to the body wall. Some animals, like horses, there's a huge section of intestine that is not anchored to the body wall by a mesentery, and that gets twisted up really easily. These organs, like the intestine, that are inside the peritoneum, we call intraperitoneal. Say the kidney, we would call retroperitoneal because it's behind the peritoneum. All right, moving on. Oh, and there it is, retroperitoneal. Look at outside or posterior to the peritoneum. We're talking the pancreas, the duodenum, some parts of the large intestine, all the parts of the kidney. So, all right. So here we have most digestive organs are intraperitoneal. Here we show what retroperitoneal looks like. And in between the two, we have intraperitoneal, but with an extra anchor on the other side. All right, so if you inflame the peritoneum, you could have get stabbed in the gut, but you could have an ulcer that's erupting or an appendix that's exploding. The peritoneal covers stick together. That keeps infections in the area. This is dangerous. This is lethal. If you can't solve it, you got to get that infection out. The treatment would be to give the person mega doses of antibiotic and try to remove any of the infection. Cut them open, scrape it out, wash it out, basically. All right, so let's talk about things that are more pleasant. All digestive organs have the same 4 basic layers or tunics. Mucosa, which is lining the lumen. Submucosa, which is above that. That's probably where you're going to run your lymphatics, run your nerves. Muscularis externa. Now, the reason they say muscularis externa, you might say, well, that sounds like there should be an interna. There is. You have little layers of muscle that are inside the muscularis mucosa, for example. But that's part of the mucosa. It's very thin, tiny bit of muscle. The muscularis externa, on the other hand, that's your peristalsis, that's your segmentation. That's big amounts of muscle. The serosa, that is the outer layer, which is the serous membrane, which is the peritoneum, in most of the body. In some places, the serosa is replaced with adventitia, connective tissue, in places that you are anchoring the organ to the body wall instead of the normal mesentery method. Okay, moving on. So mucosa, the tunic that lines the lumen, it has 3 different functions here. listed, and it could do one or all of these depending on the organ. The mucosa makes mucus, not surprising. Mucus, enzymes, hormones. So like the mouth and the stomach, we're making huge amounts of enzymes. Small intestine, small amounts of enzymes. The esophagus, not any enzymes, or very few. The same thing, large intestine, you're absorbing water. You're not putting things into the feces. Uh, you could do absorption. We've talked about that before. Most of your absorption is the small intestine. You need to know that. You could protect against infectious disease. You know, you got lymphatics running through there, so you have the white blood cells, and they can fight the bad things. So, uh, anyway, the mucosa has three layers: the epithelium, the lamina propria, and the muscularis mucosa. It's part of the mucosa. You know that because it's called muscularis mucosa, and it has small amounts of muscle. You know that again because of the name. So we're about to go through these three layers of the mucosa, remembering that the mucosa is just one of the tunics. All right. The epithelium, simple columnar epithelium and mucus creating cells in most of the GI tract. Now, not all the GI tract. The mouth, the esophagus, the anus, those are stratified squamous. Why? Same reason that anything is stratified squamous. If you're squashing those cells flat and having many, 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 many layers, it's because you have abrasion, you have stuff going by, and you don't want to like peel off one cell and then you have a hole. If you got 20, 30 layers deep and you peel off one cell, who cares? So the mouth, the esophagus, anus, a lot of abrasion, a lot of stuff passing by, rubbing against them that could be solid, could be tough. So you need to be hardened against it, and making it stratified squamous is how we do this. So what does this epithelium do? It's making mucus, which will lubricate the passage of food, protect the organs from abrasion as much as possible. And the lubrication will also make it easier for the food to go through, go on. It might make enzymes. It might make hormones. You know, the stomach does this. You know, the small intestine does this. So now remember, the mucosa is three layers. There's the epithelium we just talked about. There's also the lamina propria and the muscularis mucosa. So the lamina propria is a loose areolar connective tissue, lots of blood vessels there, needed for nourishment and absorption. You've got to be able to absorb nutrients, and you got to be able to move the nutrition, the things that are in there around through the body. You also have lymph follicles. The follicles are part of the malt mucosal associated lymphatic tissue. We've talked about that before. These are so tiny, they're not as big as a normal lymph node. And they, normal lymph node people will, hey, have you, what was the example I was just thinking of? I don't remember. Anyway, but a normal lymph node, it has a connective tissue capsule around it. It's pretty big. It has trabecula. It has stuff going on. That no, these are much simpler, tinier, and diffuse, meaning they're spread out all over through the lining of some other organ. All right, so we've got that. Then you have the layer called the muscularis mucosa. This is smooth muscle. It's not skeletal. It's not under conscious control. And these little bits of muscle will provide local movements of the mucosa. So tiny little motions. And here you can see the difference. Okay. This thin little layer here, that is muscularis mucosa. That is part of the mucosal tunic. All right. Out here, big, thick, smooth muscle. Two layers, a longitudinal layer and a circumferential layer, circular layer. Those two things are also smooth muscle, but these are moving the food around. This, yeah, okay. Hold on a second. Let me see something. Okay, so anyway, back on track. You can see that there is a muscle layer in the inner layer, okay, in the mucosa, the muscularis mucosa. But don't confuse it at all with the big, thick, multiple part muscularis externa. So, and you know which one's which because the externa one's to the outside. All right, so the submucosa has connective tissue in it, blood vessels, lymph vessels, nerves for GI tract, lymphatic vessels, abundant amount of elastic tissue that lets the organs change shape and return back to what they were. And moving on. So the externa, this is the thick layer of muscles, two layers actually. You already know circular and longitudinal. This is where we do segmentation and peristalsis. The inner layer is usually the circular one and outer one longitudinal. In some areas we have sphincters or valves. At the end of the stomach, beginning of the intestine, we have the pyloric sphincter, for example, or at the end of the small intestine, beginning of the large intestine, we have the ileocecal valve that separates the ileum of the small intestine from the cecum, which is an extension of the large intestine. It's what in humans we call an appendix. In some animals, like a rabbit or a horse, it's huge, it's massive. Anyway, moving on, like bigger than the stomach. All right. So serosa is the outermost layer. It is the same thing as the visceral peritoneum. Areolar connective tissue covered with squamous epithelium. And like the esophagus, we want to anchor it in place, don't want to move around. So that serosa is not constant. In some organs, we replace it with adventitia, which a lot of connective tissue fibers to anchor the organ in place. Dense connective tissue. Anyway, retroperitoneal have both adventitia and serosa, things like your kidney. All right, moving on. We did that already. So, all right, so let's talk about the splanchnic nerve. Arteries coming off the aorta go to digestive organs. The hepatic artery, the splenic artery, and the left gastric artery. All right. The name tells you what they do. Their hepatic goes to the liver, splenic goes to the spleen, and gastric goes to the stomach. We also have the inferior and superior mesenteric arteries. Remember, we had said the mesentery is a spot where you have two layers of serous hooked together. Then running through that, you have running between the two layers of the serous, where one is stuck together. You have the blood vessels of the mesenteric arteries, and so hepatic portal circulation. Let's talk about this. So hepatic artery. We're going to drain nutrient-rich blood from the digestive organs. This makes sense. Before we send it through the rest of the body, we better run it through the liver to see if there's anything nasty that needs to be dealt with. So the hepatic portal vein takes blood to the liver for processing. All right, control of the digestive system. Hold on. Okay, let's try that again. We're going to do control of the digestive system here. All right. The enteric nervous system, or the gut brain. What we're getting at here, when you see enteric, that means it involves the inside, and usually the GI tract is what they mean. You have more nerves talking between parts of the gut, parts of the GI tract, than you have in your central nervous system. That includes your brain and your spinal column. Or I should say, sorry, than your spinal column. I don't want to exaggerate. Let's stick to what's actually written down here. But that's insane, the amount of nerves. You also have enteric hormones that we'll talk about later. You control what's happening with hormones, which that's like when food hits the stomach is going to start sending signals to tell the intestines and the pancreas, get ready, get ready. So you'll have giving off hormones. Anyway, yeah. So the gut brain enteric neurons communicate extensively with each other, basically because you have to coordinate what one organ is doing so the next one is ready. Whenever the chyme, the mixture of food and stomach acid, comes out of the stomach, the small intestine is not, I mean, the stomach is designed to handle this stomach acidity. It can cope with that. The small intestine is not. It would get burned by the acid if it wasn't protected by the basic fluid coming from the pancreas. The pancreas doesn't just release enzymes to help the small intestine digest. It also releases bicarbonate filled, so basic solution that will neutralize the acid in the chyme coming off the stomach. So you've got to coordinate all of that stuff and make sure that you're doing the right thing at the right time with every organ. That's why we have the nervous system that they're talking about now, or the hormones that they're about to talk about. Anyway, let's move on. So, wow, that's a lot of nerves. That's a lot of nerves. Okay. So the enteric neurons make up the bulk of two intersecting intrinsic nerve plexuses. Intrinsic meaning they're inside of them. That's part of them. The submucosal nerve plexus. You already know that. Well, let's go back to show you the layers right here. All right. So our main layers were the mucosa, the muscularis externa, and the serosa. right? Okay, or adventitia. And the submucosa is part of the mucosa, submucosa, musculosa. Yeah, 4 tunics. Sorry. We have 4 main tunics. I should have gone back to that slide. So the mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis externa, the serosa. Those are 4 layers or tunics. The submucosa is one of the places we have a lot of these nerves. All right. They regulate the glands. We're talking about things like the gastric pits, releasing enzymes, and the smooth muscle in the mucosa. This is not the smooth muscle that does the segmentation or peristalsis. You remember that is in the muscularis externa. That's outside of that. The myenteric nerve plexus is what's controlling gut tract motility. So that's more likely to be the muscularis externa. Anyway, let's move on. Enteric nervous system participates in short and long reflexes. Short reflexes are mediated by gut-brain plexus to respond to stimuli in the GI tract. Long reflexes respond to stimuli outside the gut, meaning from the nervous system, like parasympathetic or sympathetic, meaning sympathetic would be, I know you just ate, but stop the digesting. We're going to send all of the blood to the brain because we have to run away from a bear right now. We have things to do. So parasympathetic, of course, would be the opposite. Yeah, all that food you have, this is the perfect time to digest it. We're going to send blood there. Get ready. All right, so there we have the pathway. External stimuli, what you see, smell, taste, or think of food. Internal stimuli, changes in how much the that organ, like the stomach, is stretching, or the pH inside the lumen, what nutrients we have present, how concentrated a solution is. All of those things can affect are detected by chemoreceptors, osmoreceptors, mechanoreceptors. Autonomic nervous system extrinsic controls sent from the brain go to the nerve plexus in the gut brain, and that will affect the smooth muscular glands. Yeah. Okay, this is it's a flow chart. I don't particularly like this one. Moving on. So 3 key concepts here. Digestive activity provoked by mechanical and chemical stimuli. You have receptors in the walls of the organs that they let you know about stretch, about osmolarity. That's a fancy way of saying concentration. Let you know about the pH, the presence of substrate, stuff that enzymes work on. You remember enzymes work on substrates, and end products of digestion. So effectors of digestive activity are smooth muscle and glands. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. When stimulated, receptors initiate reflexes in the smooth muscle. Stimulate the smooth muscle to mix and move lumen contents. That's talking about segmentation and peristalsis. Mixing is segmentation. Movement. Here, we'll do it like this. And movement. That would be peristalsis. So reflexes could also activate and inhibit glands that secrete digestive juices or hormones. Yeah, makes sense. So neurons, intrinsic, extrinsic neurons, and hormones all control digestive activity. We have intrinsic controls that are short. So short reflex from one organ to another with the nervous system. Extrinsic, they're coming from elsewhere in the body, probably the central nervous system. Hormonal controls, here we go. Hormones from cells in the stomach and small intestine stimulate target cells in the same or different organs to secrete or contract. Whenever people talk about, oh, we're going to say the endocrine system, they don't talk much about hormones from the stomach, hormones from the small intestine, but that's really a thing. Uh, some people would actually say that's more paracrine than endocrine, meaning, oh, it's too local, but to call it endocrine. Anyway, let's go through the anatomy. This is straightforward. The mouth is where food is chewed, and gosh, we're about to talk about teeth. Okay, folks, we're gonna try this. I'm gonna apologize in advance because one of the dogs is getting riled up and probably about to bark. Anyway, what I was doing, hush, was finding a picture. Since we're about to talk about teeth, picture to draw a comparison for you to sword construction. I they're actually really, really similar. Anyway, so in the mouth and associated organs, the mouth is part of the GI tract, the tongue, the salivary glands, the teeth, those are considered to be accessory organs, okay? The mouth is where food is chewed. It's mixed with saliva. The saliva begins the process of digestion. That's where we start the swallowing. When we say we begin the process of digestion, things like salivary amylase will start the breakdown of starch in the mouth. All right, so moving on. The mouth is also called the oral cavity or the buccal cavity. Some people say buccal. What we're talking about, the muscle of the cheek, that's the buccinator. Sorry, you couldn't see what I was doing. Yes? That's your buccinator. Okay, so the buccal cavity is the area in between the cheeks. So bounded by the lips at the front, the cheeks on the sides, the palate on top, and the tongue on the bottom. The stuff in between there, that is the oral cavity. The oral orifice where the lips are, that's at the front, the anterior side. The walls of the mouth are lined with stratified squamous epithelium. You've heard this before. That stuff is good for abrasion resistance. You have lots and lots of flattened cells, lots and lots of layers. What that means is you know things are going to be rubbing on it. If you see stratified squamous, you can rub off a few cells without breaking the wall of the layer. All right. So the gums, the hard palate, and part of the tongue, they're not just stratified squamous epithelium, they are keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. That means that just like your epidermis, they have a lot of the protein keratin, which makes them tough and extra good at resisting the abrasion. All right, so your lips, your cheeks, the lips are composed of a muscle called the orbicularis oris. If you read it, it means it orbits the oral cavity. It's a perfect name. It's the rounded muscles right there. Okay. The cheeks are the buccinator. You already heard that. The oral vestibule is the area internal to the lips and cheeks, external to the teeth and gums. So we're talking right there. Okay. See how my finger's in front of my teeth but behind my lip? That area is the vestibule, which means entryway if you're talking architecture. Well, anatomy, we're using it the same way. All right, so the oral cavity proper, that's what's behind the teeth and gums. And the labial frenulum, medium attachment of each lip to gum. All right, so put your tongue up and you can feel a little kind of like a septa the little wall where that upper lip attaches to the gum. And same thing, I can show you this one. Right there, this little piece, that's the frenulum that they're talking about. That's the labial frenulum. Obviously, we have one right there that's a lingual frenulum. All right. Yeah, lingual tongue. Yeah. Okay, so let's now go through here. And the hard palate is in front, soft palate behind. If you stick your fingers against the roof of your mouth, you move them back, 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 back. All of a sudden, it'll feel soft. That's because you ran out of bone. You went from the hard palate, where you have palatine bones, to the soft palate, where you just have flesh. The hangy down thing in the middle of coming from the roof of the mouth, that's your uvula. That's an extension of the soft palate. That's the thing that when you swallow, it's going to swing up and seal the nasal cavity to keep food and water from going up there, because that's bad. Now, at each side of the palate, you have the palatine tonsils, okay? Although it's not in this picture, above the soft palate at the back, I'm trying to get my mouse back, up here, about where the word uvula is, that's where you're going to have your adenoids, okay? The other tonsils. Let's see, what else do we have to point out here? At the base of the tongue, everything lingual is tongue. At the base of the tongue, you have the lingual tonsils. When you swallow, here we have our epiglottis. Remember, most of the larynx is made out of hyaline cartilage, but the epiglottis is made out of elastic cartilage, like your ear. It can spring forward, backward all the time. No, it doesn't crack. That's good, because every time we swallow this, let me move that away so you can see. Every time we swallow, this epiglottis is going to go down, and whatever we're swallowing will go over it. And then, because the epiglottis is above the glottis, that's what the name means, it's covering this hole, this glottis, this opening. It forms a slide, and the food or liquid goes behind the glottis, and instead of going down the trachea, it goes down the esophagus. All right, so we've got that. Let's move on. So your palate is the roof of the mouth. Hard palate would be palatine bones and the palatine parts of the maxillary bones. The mucosa is slightly corrugated. You feel the ridges on the roof of your mouth. That's what they're talking about. That creates friction against the tongue, makes it easy to hold the food in place. All right, the soft palate is what's behind the bone, where it feels soft. That's because you have a roof made out of soft tissue, made out of muscle at that point. It closes off the nasopharynx and the nose from the oropharynx. It's the division. At the edges, the soft palate is hooked to the tongue by the palatoglossal arches. The interior wall of the oropharynx by the palatopharyngeal arches. The area between the two arches is called the fauces. That's the opening. Your palatine tonsils are in the fauces. Your uvula is the thing in the middle of the soft palate that hangs down, forms a free edge of the soft palate. Great. Yeah, we talked about that. So there you have your uvula. There you can see the palatoglossal arch. Give me my mouse right here. You can see the palatine tonsils, obviously up above or where the adenoids are in the nasopharynx. The labial frenulum is there. The lingual frenulum is here. So lingual frenulum much bigger, labial frenulum right there. This is straightforward. This is stuff we talked about, stuff on the last few slides. So, all right, the tongue occupies the floor of the mouth. It's a lot of skeletal muscle. Now, it's sort of interesting because skeletal muscle, most of it is attached to skeleton. We're not here. Well, not most of it. The base of the tongue attached to the hyoid, but most of the tongue, you have skeletal muscle fibers pulling on other skeletal muscle fibers. So odd, but it's skeletal muscle, which is a fancy way of saying it's striated muscle. It's voluntary muscle. We can control it with conscious thought. It can grip food by pushing it against the roof of the mouth. It can reposition food, move it around. It can mix food with saliva while we are chewing. It's what forms the bolus, the lump of food mixed with saliva. Now, the similar lump when it comes out of the stomach, and it's that food mixed with stomach juices, we're going to call it chyme, C-H-Y-M-E, but we'll get there. Anyway, intrinsic muscles will change the shape of the tongue. This means that the muscles in the tongue can make the tongue narrower, wider, taller, whatever. The extrinsic muscles, ones that are attached outside of the, at least on one side, one end of that muscle is attached to something that is not part of the tongue. Those are going to alter the tongue's position. And the lingual frenulum, you already saw. That little flap there at the base of the tongue, that's the attachment of the tongue to the floor of the mouth. All right, the tongue on its surface has papillae. Remember, papillae are sticky up finger-like extensions. Okay, those are what give the tongue roughness and friction to hold on to the food. Peg-leg protection. So we'll start with the filiform. Filiform means in the form of a file. These make the tongue rough and provide friction, hold on to the food. They are the only one of those papilla types that don't have any taste buds. They're what give a white appearance. They are what cats have huge numbers of, where they can lick their fur and brush their fur with their tongue. So that's a filiform papilla. Fungiform, you're supposed to see the word fungi. It's like, oh, in the shape of a mushroom. Use your imagination, not so much. But yeah, they might be a little wider at the top than the base. These are all over the tongue. They have blood vessels in the middle. They're what give the reddish color. Valate or circumvallate. These form, you only have a few, like 8 to 12, and they make a V-shaped row at the back of the tongue. But they're big. And then you have folate, which are on the sides of the back of the tongue. And folate, think of foliage, think of leaf. Anyway, so the terminal sulcus, terminal means the end, and sulcus is a groove. It is a groove on the tongue that is behind the little V made of the valate papilla. And that's the division between the body of the tongue and the root of the tongue. The root is the back third that is past the mouth proper and in the oropharynx. This terminal sulcus doesn't have any papilla, but it's still bumpy because there's a lingual tonsil that's right below its mucosa. All right, moving on. So here's what we are talking about. These are the V-shaped line of valate papilla. The foliate ones are on the side. You can imagine it looks like a bunch of leaves that are laid down. The medial sulcus means the middle groove on the tongue. Dorsum for the top. Fungiform are fungus shaped, mushroom shaped. Filiform are like a file. Those tend to be long and pointed on the end. Do we not have a picture? Come on, people. All right. We're about to get us a picture to show you. Because there should have been a decent microscope picture. Hold on. Okay, folks, let's pull up some histology, since that was sorely lacking. And here we go. These, see how the spiky, sharp, almost like hooks? These are filiform, all right? They look like the teeth on a rasp or a file. Those are what the rough areas of the tongue are covered with, like the big example I used was a cat's tongue. Cat's tongues are full of those. Now, right here, it doesn't make me happy. It's better. Okay. The problem is that one shows significant narrowing at the bottom. And I was going to tell you that the significant narrowing is what we're going to see in fungiform. But let's stick with this picture as it's better, because it's not quite as narrowed in the base. This would be a circumvallate, and the circum should remind you of circumference. If you drop a rock in the water, you see the rings going out. That's kind of what we're talking about. The spot in the middle, where the water rises up again, that's the circumvallate papilla. The rings around it are in a circumference around the dropped rock. So circumvallate, you're going to see ridges around that raised papilla. Those are the ones with taste buds down the sides. So you got some taste buds down here. The white dots there are taste buds. They're not on the top of the tongue here. I don't know why they showed that slide that way. They should have flipped it over. But anyway, if we look, yeah, okay, right there, taste buds. But what I was going to do was try to show you foliate and circumvallate. So those are taste buds. Yeah, we've got that in the side. So filiform, let's go up to fungiform. That'll work. So fungiform means in the form of the fungus. This one is a good fungiform. You can see it's wider at the top, narrower at the bottom, kind of like a mushroom with the cap. It's wider than the stem of the mushroom. That's what they're shooting for. So this is another nice one. It's easy to see. So yeah, let's go back to the PowerPoint. That would be more useful anyway. Okay, so pause share, pause recording. Good. So both things are going. Let's move on. So homeostatic imbalance, ankyloglossia. This would be a problem if someone has a very short lingual frenulum, talking that flap at the base of the tongue. A lot of times people call it tongue-tied or fused tongue. The tongue is held down, so it can't move as well. The way that can cause trouble with the kid learning to speak properly. They treat that by cutting that little flap, that frenulum. Not mentioned here, but something I've also seen is if someone has a tongue piercing that has a really large barbell, they can cut the frenulum to prevent the end of the barbell from being annoyed. Well, sorry, prevent the end of the barbell from annoying the tongue. So, all right, so let's talk about saliva now. Saliva will clean the mouth. Yeah, it's got some antibacterial properties. Woohoo! Lysozyme for one of them. It will dissolve food chemicals so they can be tasted. It will moisten the food and shape it into a bolus. And it will begin the breakdown of starch with an enzyme called salivary amylase. Amylase is, this is a recap. You should know this already, but if it ends in ACE, it's probably an enzyme. And a good enzyme, the ones I like, which is the majority of them, are named so you know what they do when you hear the name. So amylase, anything that sounds amylase, amyloid, you're dealing with starches, okay? Most of the saliva that we have is produced by major salivary glands that are actually outside of the mouth. There are minor ones that they're extended, minor ones are located in the mouth, but most of them are outside the mouth and then squirt through a little duct into the mouth. So these are the major salivary glands, and yeah, you'll need to know them. They're not bad. The names are pretty straightforward. The parotid is in front of the ear and outside of the masseter muscle. The masseter muscle is the one that does mastication. You remember, it moves the jaw so you can chew food. And you would have the parotid salivary gland outside of that. It opens into the oral vestibule next to your upper second molar, so there, okay? The submandibular is below the mandible, below the lower jaw. So that means it's going to be in here, all right? The ducts open at the base of the lingual frenulum. So you have your gland here, and the openings right there on each side of the base of the frenulum. The lingual frenulum. No lingual, yeah. All right. Backing up to make sure. Yeah, labial frenulum is lingual. I had it right. Yeah, so they open up there. Submandibular open up. Give me my mouse. On each side of the frenulum underneath the tongue. Good. And sublingual is below the tongue. And these are in front of the submandibular. And they open up in front of it there. So there are 10 to 12 little ducts into the floor of the mouth. All right, so there are sublingual with the lingual salivary gland being below the tongue. Okay, good. Oh, we're doing the histology. Okay, so salivary glands are composed of two types of cells. You have these serous ones that make the watery solution, the enzymes, the ions, and a bit of mucin. Mucin is the protein that we're going to make mucus out of. Mucus cells produce and release mucus in its final form. So parotid and submandibular glands contain mostly serous cells. Sublingual glands contain mostly mucin cells. That's a type of question I could say. Which of the following releases yada yada yada? So be aware that that type of question could be coming. Xerostomia is a fancy name for dry mouth. What happens when you're not making enough saliva? Saliva is necessary for oral health. You could have trouble chewing or swallowing if you don't have enough. Also, infections, because remember, the enzymes that destroy incoming bacteria are in that saliva. If you're not making saliva, you got a problem. Xerostomia can be caused by medications, diabetes, HIV/AIDS, Sjogren's syndrome. So now let's talk about what saliva is. Somewhere between 97 and even higher than 99 occasionally % water. So hypoosmotic, below osmotic. It is slightly acidic. Saliva is just barely acidic. Remember, neutral is 7, so it's somewhere from 6.75 to 7. Saliva has sodium, potassium, calcium, phosphate, and bicarbonate in it. Salivary amylase and lingual lipase are two of the enzymes released there. Lingual lipase obviously digests fats, and salivary amylase digests starches. Metabolic wastes made or contained. Urea and uric acid can be contained in the where was I? Okay, so salivary amylase, lingual lipase can be contained in the saliva. Now, proteins like mucin, which can help make more mucus, lysozyme, which will lyse bacteria trying to get in. It's an antibiotic. Also, immunoglobulin A. We're talking antibodies that look for things that don't belong. Metabolic waste, urea and uric acid. It's just a method of getting rid of them. Lysozyme, immunoglobulin A, defensins, and nitric oxide from nitrates are all found in the foods that we eat, and they will help to kill off bacteria, other microbes that are trying to get into the body through the mouth, which is good. Okay, and here we have our rotating head model. We'll look at that. Oh my, so lovely. Okay, done. Continuing. So control of salivation. We make about 1.5 liters of saliva a day. The minor glands are the ones that keep your mouth moist. The major ones are activated whenever it's time for us to eat. Parasympathetic nervous reaction. If you take food in, chemoreceptors and mechanoreceptors tell your mouth, hey, we need saliva, we got stuff in here. Salivary nuclei in the brain will tell it, stimulate parasympathetic impulses along fibers in the cranial nerves 12 and 9 to the glands. So, yeah, we got that. Strong sympathetic stimulation inhibits salivation, results in dry mouth. We don't worry about making saliva when we got to run from the bear. All right, strong sympathetic. Yeah, we just did that. Smell inside of food or upset GI tract can act as a stimuli. So, Pavlov's dog, or you smell your favorite meal being cooked and you start to see well. That's right. And you start to stimulate the saliva, the salivary glands. All right, let's move on. Clinical homeostatic imbalance. If your teeth are decaying and it's painful, the primary teeth are the first set of teeth, kids' teeth. If you can't let those decay, you got to take care of them. Yes, you're going to replace them, but you don't want to let bacteria harbor in your body. That'd be bad. The primary teeth are placeholders for permanent teeth. Primary teeth, keep them healthy, same way as adult teeth, by brushing, not putting sugary liquids on them, especially prolonged from bottle feeding. If people bottle feed for too long after their kids have teethed, those kids can rot their teeth. All right, so teeth are in sockets in the gum, then gum-covered margins of mandible and maxilla. The mandible is your lower jaw, the maxilla is your upper jaw. There's sockets in both for your teeth to sit in. It's not mentioned yet on this slide, but will be eventually. The teeth are anchored into those sockets by the periodontal ligament. So mastication is the fancy name for chewing food. Dentition, the dental formula. What are they doing? Because dental formula, the adult dental formula is 2-1-2-3. We'll get to that. Anyway, primary dentition consists of 20 baby teeth, or also called milk teeth or deciduous teeth, that between 6 and 24 months of age, you get your first set of teeth, and 32 permanent teeth that will enlarge, they'll develop roots, and the deciduous teeth, the milk teeth, their roots are going to be reabsorbed. That's going to make them wiggly, loose, weak, and they'll fall out of the gum. Anyway, this changeover from the primary teeth to the permanent teeth, it's usually spread from 6 months to 12 years. Moving on. All right, all but third molars are in by the end of adolescence. We're talking about the adult set of teeth. The adult set of teeth, most are in except your wisdom teeth. Wisdom teeth are problematic. The human jaw is getting shorter over time, and wisdom teeth a lot of times need to be extracted before they can come in, because there may not be room in a modern jaw. Anyway, third molars may or may not emerge around 17 to 25 years of age. Your teeth are designed, I don't know why they're not saying molars here too. So incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. Are molars on the next slide? Yeah, they are. That's stupid. They should have been on this slide. Hold on, we're about to fix that. Okay, much better. We now have all 4 of the tooth types on the same page. So incisors, canines, premolars, molars. These are easy to see. Start with your fingers here at the front, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you it's the human adult dental formula is 2-1-2-3. Now, not all animals are the same. Some have differences between what's happening in the upper jaw, what's happening in the lower. Humans, it's real simple. Both upper jaw and lower jaw, 2-1-2-3 is what we normally have. So that means that in the front here, we have 2 pairs of incisors, 1 pair of canines, 1, 2, 2 pairs of premolars, and 3 pairs of molars, which you already know. Since that includes your wisdom teeth, a lot of people won't actually have 3. A lot of people have 2 because they surgically remove 1 pair as a kid to keep your jaw from overcrowding. Anyway, but 2-1-2-3 is the natural formula for humans. And moving on. All right, human dentition. We have the deciduous teeth, baby teeth, and then we have the permanent teeth. Permanent teeth you can see there are 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars, and then 3 molars, assuming that they come in. In all honesty, the last one, the wisdom tooth on each side, it may not come in because we may surgically extract it beforehand. Now, baby teeth, there are fewer of them and they're simpler. You have 2 incisors, you have 1 canine, you have no premolars, but you have 2 molars. All right. So 2, 1, 0, 2 would be the baby human formula. 2, 1, 0, 2. And the adult formula is 2, 1, 2, 3. Great. So we got that out of the way. Oh, here it is. All right. They are showing 2, 1. They're not mentioning the premolars. I've always seen it done with 0 and then 2. But anyway. And ours in humans, thankfully, it's simple. We are the same upper and lower jaw. Not all animals are the same, but I definitely want you to know the permanent dental formula 2, 1, 2, 3. That's super important. Okay, moving on. Each tooth has 2 regions. We have the crown, that's the part above the gum, and we have the root, that's the part that's embedded in the jaw. I believe they call the part that's in the gum the neck, but we'll see. So the crown, it's covered by enamel, which is super, super tough, super hard. Full of calcium salt, hydroxyapatite. Enamel producing cells will degenerate when a tooth erupts, so there's no healing if you break a tooth. And do we have the pretty picture? We do not. Why is there no picture? Okay, there's a picture. We'll get to that. So I will come back from there. Yeah, so the crown is what's above the gum. The neck is what's in the gum. And the root is everything down below. And now we back up. All right, so canines and incisors, premolars only have 1 root. The first upper, and then of course there's an exception. The first upper premolar often has 2, but the first 2 upper molars have 3 roots, and the first 2 lower molars have 2 roots. Third molar roots vary, they're often fused to a single root. Remember, the root is the part that attaches this to the jaw. Okay, moving on. All right, so cement is calcified connective tissue. It covers the root and is attached to the periodontal ligament. The periodontal ligament forms a the periodontal ligament is what anchors the tooth into the socket. And it forms the fibrous joint they call a gomphosis. You'll probably remember that from sutures of the skull, actually. The gingival sulcus is the groove where the gingiva borders the tooth, where the gum borders the tooth. And dentin is a bone-like material under the enamel. Hold on, I'm going to check the pronunciation on that. Make sure I'm saying it right. Okay, I went and checked, and yes, dentin is the correct pronunciation. I sometimes get that mixed up because there's the gum named dentine, which of course it comes from the same root, but it's not pronounced the same. So dentin is the material under the enamel, the core, and there are there are odontoblasts in the pulp cavity that help maintain the dentin. Donto for like dentist, like teeth, and blast for baby cells that build things. This should all sound familiar. Okay, the pulp cavity is surrounded by the dentin. I really wish this picture was used multiple times. The pulp is connective tissue, blood vessels, nerves. The root canal is the pulp extending down through the root, and the apical. Remember, an apex is a tip. The apical foramen as a whole, is at the proximal end of the root. Fancy way of saying the tip of the root down in the jaw. This is an entryway for blood vessels and nerves to get around. All right, so here we have our dentin in blue. We have our tougher, harder enamel in white. And down here we have the apex with a hole called an apical foramen. And that's where blood vessels enter and leave. Now, things I want to point out here. The first one is the periodontal ligament. This attaches the tooth, holds it in the jaw socket. All right. And in us, this is tough, stiff. In some other animals, like a bamboo shark, this is very flexible. Their teeth can move around, and we can talk about that later if you want to know why. But look at this dentin versus the enamel. You already saw on the slide that enamel is the toughest, the hardest stuff that our teeth are made out of, in the body. It's the strongest and toughest stuff. So why don't we make the whole tooth out of that? Heck, why don't we make bones out of that if that's better than bone, harder than bone? The answer is because it's tough, it's abrasion resistant, but it's brittle. It'll break fairly easily. So you want a tough, abrasion-resistant coating and a softer core that has some give to it so you don't break the whole tooth every time you're trying to use it. So let's compare that to a sword. I'm going to stop the share. I will share. Here's that picture I went looking for before. Not all the swords, but I want you to look at this construction. And there are different names that people use, but this illustration is calling it a Makure Gite, but it's a Japanese sword. And notice that it has a softer core steel and a much harder jacket steel around the outside that has the tip ground on it. What this does is if you made a whole sword out of that harder jacket steel, you would be much more likely to break the tip off of that sword when you were using it. You don't want to go in battle and have the tip broken off. That sucks. So what do you do to prevent this? Most of the sword may be hard, but the spine right here, the main part of the blade where it's likely to crack, that's a softer steel that won't crack as easily. It'll bend a little and come back. And that gives the sword the durability to survive multiple battles. Okay, so what's that have to do with our tooth? Let's go back to our picture of our tooth here. And you can see, same orientation. We got the hard jacket on the outside. We have it's tough. I mean, steel's tough. We have a tough, but not super brittle, more durable core here. That's useful for long life in the tooth. And yeah, that's all that I was wanting to harp on. I think that makes it easier to remember where dentin is and where enamel is, and why enamel has the properties it does, being the tough, abrasion resistant. It's got all kinds of food bouncing off of it all the time, kind of like the jacket steel on a katana has the other swords bouncing off of it. Anyway, so let's talk about different homeostatic imbalances. An impacted tooth is a tooth that won't erupt. It won't come out of the jawbone. It hurts like heck. Wisdom teeth are the ones that are most common, and they typically treat them by removing the wisdom teeth. I've had all my wisdom teeth removed, and I can tell you it hurts. When I had them do it, the first one, from then on, I was like, no, we're going to. I wanted a general anesthetic, and you take them out while I'm asleep, while I'm asleep, and that worked a lot better. You're still left with a big hole in your jaw that you got to stuff gauze up into to absorb blood that leaks out, and do that for days. But whatever. All right. Cavities, the real anatomy name is caries. They are places where the enamel has lost its minerals, and the dentin could too. This is caused by bacteria, and the bacterial plaque. It's a film of sugar bacteria that's sticking in the teeth. This will literally dissolve the calcium salts right out of the enamel, out of the dentin. There are proteolytic enzymes given off by the bacteria that will digest organic matter. Um, you have to floss. You have to floss. You have to brush. You have to get rid of the bacteria if you don't want to lose your teeth. And it's not just a matter of losing your teeth. This will blow your mind. Um, okay, folks, check this out. Because those bacteria, they're bad. Tooth loss is now being associated with dementia. They think that the bacteria affect the nervous system, and if you let those bacteria grow and destroy your teeth, they are probably going to be more. If that happens, you are going to be more likely to have mental impairment as you grow older. This is not something you want. Here we go. Researchers found that adults with more tooth loss had a 1.48 times higher risk of developing cognitive impairment and a 1.28 times higher risk of being diagnosed with dementia, even after controlling other factors. What this means is that not taking care of your teeth, letting those bacteria run rampant, makes you 28% to 48% more likely to have brain problems later on in life. Not good. Don't take the risk. Take care of your teeth. If you want to look this up, this is from New York University, but you can easily find it by Googling tooth loss dementia. I would recommend you also do tooth loss Alzheimer's. There's another study a couple of years back when they dissected the brains of patients who had dementia. They all had the bacteria in the brain. So, yeah, take it seriously. Clean your teeth. Moving on, moving on. Oh, sorry. Let's stop. Close out. Okay. So daily flossing and brushing, yeah, do it. Clean your teeth so you don't have mental problems. It's not a guarantee that you would, but why increase your risk? All right. So gingivitis, most people in the US get this at some point in time. Itis is inflammation and gingiva is the gum. Well, when this happens, plaque can form calculus, the fancy name for what dentists call tartar. Yes, calculus is bad. I said that, and you can tell the math people. Calculus will disrupt the seal between your gum and your teeth. It'll let bacteria get down in there. They infect the gums. It says anaerobic bacteria. I want to point out that that's not an area with a lot of oxygen, so they're real at home there. And that infection causing gingivitis, or that infection caused by gingivitis, thank you, that can be solved. That's reversible if you have the teeth cleaned and get rid of the tartar, get rid of the calculus. All right, periodontitis. You know the periodontal ligament holds the tooth in the socket. You know itis is inflammation. If you don't take care of the gingiva, it gets worse, and then you will have bacteria take up housing there, and the body's immune cells try to attack them. When they do, they won't just destroy the bacteria, they'll destroy the ligament, and then you're going to lose the teeth. You could also have the immune system accidentally turn on osteoclasts. Remember, which cut bone. What that means, those are normally in your bones and remodeling the bone all the time, no big deal. But if this happens, you'll have cells in your body attacking and destroying the bone in the jaw. You could lose pieces of the jawbone around the tooth. It'd be really bad, not just lose the tooth. You also could increase heart disease and stroke. This promotes plaque formation in your arteries, and bacteria that enter the blood could form clots, and then you have clots circulating in coronary and cerebral arteries. That's just asking to have a thrombus plug things up. What are risk factors that can make this worse, make periodontal disease worse? Smoking, diabetes, oral piercings. And that is the end of this PowerPoint. Let's stop and upload it.